It's Thursday, September 6th. The Supreme Court will today take up the matter of the arrest of the 5 rights activists by the Maharashtra police. Last week, the Apex Court had, acting on a petition filed by intellectuals including historian Romila Thapar and economist Prabhat Patnaik, directed that the activists be kept under house arrest and cautioned against silencing dissent. The Maharashtra police filed an affidavit in the Supreme Court yesterday, stating that they have evidence that suggests the 5 are active members of the banned CPI Maoists. Seeking their custody for interrogation, the Maharashtra police claimed the 5 were involved in planning and preparing for violence and destruction of property. The police submitted in a sealed envelope what they said was evidence of their claims. Meanwhile, Tushar Damgude from Pune, on whose FIR the police had actioned the arrest of the activists, has moved to Supreme Court, seeking to be made party to the hearing. Who is Tushar Damgude? 38-year-old Damgude says he is a businessman from Pune. His social media feed is full of posts attacking left activists. In his FIR too, Damgude highlights revolutionary songs, pamphlets and speeches as proof of a violent conspiracy to attack the country. Damgude's Facebook page also has a picture of him with Sambhaji Bide, a Hindutva leader accused of inciting violence against the Dalits at Bhima Koregaon. Bide is yet to be arrested. Fellow Hindutva leader Milind Ekbote is also an accused in the matter. He was arrested and later released on bail. Now, what are the options before the Supreme Court? The criminal case is still in the initial stage of investigation. Can the court quash the investigation altogether? Will it ask the police to proceed with the probe without taking the accused into custody? Now, the petition did not seek to dismiss the case. The plea before the bench was straightforward: to order an independent investigation into the matter, stay the arrest of the activists, and seek an explanation from the Maharashtra police on the arrests. The Supreme Court will have to first examine whether due procedure was followed when the arrests were made. Already, the lawyers appearing for the accused have pointed out glaring deficiencies, including the fact that all papers were in Marathi, a language alien to some of the accused. The petitioners will seek to convince the Apex Court of procedural lapses. Under the powers available to it under Article 142, legal experts say the Supreme Court could choose to monitor the investigation to ensure arbitrary police action is avoided, or it could direct the High Court to monitor the probe. After multiple postponements, the India-US 2+2 dialogue will see Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj and Defense Minister Nirmala Sitharaman meet their American counterparts Mike Pompeo and James Mattis in New Delhi today. What's 2+2? This high-level dialogue mechanism was evolved to keep the defense and strategic relationship between the two countries in focus and perhaps insulated from trade differences. So, what are we expecting? Apart from discussions on defense purchases, India is expected to seek a waiver from the US's Russia sanctions under CAATSA, which is Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. Under CAATSA, American sanctions against Russia extend to countries that engage with Russia on defense. India has made it clear it plans to go ahead with the purchase of the S-400 systems from Russia, irrespective of the American position. The S-400 is one of the world's most advanced air defense systems. New Delhi has reportedly conveyed that American sanctions legislation cannot be allowed to derail India-Russia military ties. What are the other contentious issues? India is also expected to convey that it will not be cutting oil imports from Iran after sanctions take effect from November. Sushma Swaraj had already stated that India only follows UN sanctions and will not agree to unilateral restrictions. India, remember, imports 80% of its oil requirements, and Iran is India's third largest supplier. India risks getting cut off from the US financial system if it continues to do business with Iran. Among other developments to watch out for, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be flying into Delhi from Islamabad after having met the new Imran Khan administration. Earlier this week, America had announced it was cutting $300 million in aid to Pakistan for failing to rein in terrorist networks. India is expected to push for a United Nations Security Council designation of Jaish chief Masood Azhar as a terrorist. stating that there cannot be any curbs on the imagination of a writer and literary freedom. The Supreme Court on Wednesday dismissed the plea seeking a ban on the Malayalam novel Meesha for its alleged objectionable portrayal of temple-going women. The bench, headed by Chief Justice Deepak Mishra, held that subjective perceptions about a book should not be allowed to enter the legal arena when it comes to censorship. The petitioner had taken objection to a conversation between two characters in the book, which he alleges insulted temple-going women. Writer S. Harish had announced in July that he was stopping the serialized publication of his novel Meesha in Malayalam weekly Mathrubhumi after protests by Hindutva activists. They picked on a conversation between two characters in which one of them said that well-dressed girls who visit temples are subconsciously conveying their readiness for sex. Harish then said he had received several threats to his life through phone calls, text messages, and social media. Mathrubhumi News Channel quoted him as saying, DC Books later published the novel in its entirety in August. Legendary journalist Bob Woodward has a new book out on 11 September. It's 448 pages of an unprecedented insider's view of Trump's tumultuous White House. Based on hundreds of hours of taped interviews of sources from Trump's inner circle, documents, files, diaries, memos, and handwritten notes from Trump himself, Fear, Trump in the White House outlines the man Trump is and the single-handed, nervous breakdown of executive power that he has caused. Woodward has written in excruciating detail about the lengths to which Trump aides have gone to prevent him from acting out, including, Woodward writes, stealing papers from the president's desk. While the White House has accused Woodward of spreading, quote, fabricated stories, top officials including White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, ex-Trump lawyer John Dowd, and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis have denied making comments attributed to them in the book. But Washington Post reporter extraordinaire Bob Woodward, whose 1974 investigation of the Watergate scandal with Carl Bernstein led to the resignation of then US President Richard Nixon, isn't a voice to be trifled with. With stunning details about Trump's obsession with the Russia probe, the book includes a detailed summary of Trump allegedly failing a mock Mueller interview with his former Attorney General because he was categorically incapable of saying the truth. Woodward outlines clear incidents of the US president failing to understand global trade policy, including comments like, "You should be killing guys. You don't need a strategy to kill people," that he allegedly said about Afghanistan. Throughout the book, the US president is portrayed as a lonely, paranoid megalomaniac who watches TV hours on the end and convinced that they are out to get him. Last month, Woodward received a call from the president who insisted he hadn't heard from Woodward for an interview. The bizarre conversation ends with Woodward promising that he had been accurate and Trump replying, "Accurate is that nobody's ever done a better job than I'm doing as president, that I can tell you." This December 2013 India Today cover best captured the anger and betrayal sexual minorities in India felt following the Supreme Court judgment that made being homosexual a crime again. Celebrated writer Vikram Seth, seen here, wrote, "Of all the cruelties that we as human beings can visit on one another, one of the most cruel is to say, 'You shall not love or make love with the person you love, not because of excessive youth or because of unwillingness, but because he or she comes from a different religion, a different caste, the same village, the same gender.'" Seth also pointed out to those who lauded him for his stance, "There is nothing heroic in doing what I have done. There are gay people who live lives of quiet desperation in India's towns and villages. They are bullied by their families and relatives." That judgment by the Supreme Court is an appeal, and the Constitution Bench of the Apex Court will today pronounce its verdict. First, what is Section 377 of the IPC? Section 377 is a British-era law enacted in the 1860s that criminalizes so-called sex against the order of nature, or in other words, it even makes consensual gay sex criminal. Essentially, what two consenting adults do in the privacy of their homes is under state scrutiny. Let's look at how the courts have viewed the matter. In the year 2000, the Law Commission in its report recommended that Section 377 be deleted. The Commission was of the opinion that consensual sex between adults, whether of a heterosexual or homosexual nature, should not be penalized, unless, of course, it was non-consensual. Remember, those who've been vocal advocates of retaining the section often state the necessity of this provision to deal with the sexual assault of minor boys. So, the Commission recommended that the law relating to sexual assault be made gender neutral, meaning non-consensual sexual acts committed on a person of the same gender also be covered under the rape law, which is to say that men and women can be charged with the rape of men, women and children. Of course, today there is a separate law, POCSO, that deals with child sexual abuse and rape. So what did the government do with the Law Commission recommendation? Nothing. We'll come to the role of elected politicians a little later. So, armed with the Law Commission report, a petition was filed in the Delhi High Court seeking that Section 377 be struck down. The petition stated that by criminalizing private, consensual, same-sex conduct, Section 377 serves as the weapon for police abuse, detaining and questioning, extortion, harassment, forced sex, payment of hush money, and perpetuates negative and discriminatory beliefs towards same-sex relations and sexual minorities. In a landmark judgment in 2009, the Delhi High Court read down Section 377. Justice A.P. Shah, who authored the judgment, said, "In our view, Indian constitutional law does not permit that criminal law be held captive by popular misconceptions of who the LGBTs are. It cannot be forgotten that discrimination is the antithesis of equality, and it is the recognition of equality which will foster the dignity of every individual." The judgment declared that Section 377, insofar as it criminalizes consensual acts between adults in private, violates Article 21, 14, and 15 of the Constitution. The judgment was appealed in the Supreme Court. The petitioners included assorted religious groups. In 2013, in a judgment that was described by rights activists as having set us back by 100 years, the Supreme Court overturned the High Court judgment. In essence, the Supreme Court made being gay criminal again. Justifying its decision, it said, the High Court overlooked that a minuscule fraction of the country's population constitute lesbians, gays, bisexuals or transgenders, and in the last more than 150 years, less than 200 persons have been prosecuted for committing offence under Section 377, to which rights activists asked, is the constitutionality of a provision to be decided by the number of people affected? Furthermore, even when penal provisions are not enforced, the existence of that section in the statute books reduces gay men or women to what one author referred to as unapprehended felons, thus entrenching the stigma and encouraging discrimination. As a consequence, they're subject to harassment, blackmail, and extortion. The Supreme Court judgment also referred to Parliament's reluctance to do away with the law, saying, this shows that Parliament, which is the representative body of the people of India, has not thought it proper to delete the provision. Again, this aspect has been dealt with in the Delhi High Court judgment, which spoke of popular morality versus constitutional morality. Moral indignation, it said, howsoever strong, is not a valid basis for overriding individuals' fundamental rights of dignity and privacy. In August 2017, hope floated again, in the form of a historic 9-judge bench verdict, now commonly known as the privacy verdict. The judgment declared privacy as intrinsic to life and liberty and an inherent right protected by the Constitution. The court held that sexual orientation is an essential attribute of privacy. Discrimination against an individual on the basis of sexual orientation is deeply offensive to the dignity and self-worth of the individual. This judgment is likely to have a bearing on how the Supreme Court decides on the challenge to Section 377. Let's look at the big letdown by the legislature and the executive. The government of the day or subsequent ones could have acted on the Law Commission recommendation of 2000 and removed the offending section, but did not. Since public memory is short, let's remind you that the Congress party has not been a paragon of progressive values either. When the Delhi High Court was hearing the matter, the Health Ministry under the UPA took a view that Section 377 should be done away with, but the Home Ministry disagreed, describing homosexuality as a social vice and a reflection of a perverse mind. And finally, let's hear it from the doctors. The Indian Psychiatric Society earlier this year launched its first ever campaign to assert that homosexuality is not an illness. This to dispel a belief in large sections of the public that mistakenly think of homosexuality as an illness that needs to be cured. And finally, several Americans are burning their Nike merchandise to protest against the sports brand's latest campaign featuring former American NFL player Colin Kaepernick. Kaepernick, a former San Francisco 49ers quarterback, sparked controversy in 2016 by taking a knee during the national anthem to protest social injustice and police brutality in America. The move generated backlash in some quarters, including from President Trump, and ended Kaepernick's career and inspired the campaign tagline. But the campaign also highlighted the skewed ethics of a sports brand, often accused of labor violations, capitalizing on an ideology. Meanwhile, those destroying merchandise have been ridiculed for, destroying things they've already paid for. That's all for today. Tune back tomorrow. Just do it, we say.